Hello, everyone. My name is Yolanda Scott, the host of Social Work in Action, and I would like to welcome you to today's episode. Today's topic, we will be discussing the Black Lives Matter movement, and I have two special guests with me today, Heather McCabe and Sharia Former. Yay! So, Heather, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, yes. My name's Heather McCabe, as you said. I'm a social work assistant professor at Indiana University in Indianapolis, Indiana, School of Social Work. And I also, while I identify as a social worker, happen to be a lawyer, and I teach at both the schools of public health and the schools of law, which I think is great for this conversation because I also see it as a public health issue, and there's certainly policy implications.
Sharia.
Hey, hello again. If you watch other shows, right? I'm Sharia Farmer. I am a licensed social worker here in Philadelphia and New Jersey. My background is the macro element is primarily with Rutgers University. I'm an adjunct professor where I teach specifically program design and strategic planning, as well as some issues surrounding diversity, oppression, and development of programs.
Okay. So today we'll be discussing the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm sure everyone is aware of this movement by now. If not, you've been up under a rock because it's all over the news. I mean, just about every state, has participated, or we've seen coverage on the news regarding the unfortunate deaths of young black men and young black unarmed men at the hands of police officers. So we want to talk about this today, and we're going to come from a macro perspective, just educating the public and social workers as to how we can participate and how we can help in this movement. So my first question is, since we are social workers, it seems like the social work profession is very quiet on this topic. Do we know why?
Do we know why?
Do we know why?
I feel like I think it's a conclusion of how we've evolved. So historically, we may have had more social action historically as social workers, but currently we have now evolved more into a micro profession that deals heavily on mental health or practices that revolve around taking care of people's individual well-being versus looking at societal and larger issues. So I think we've moved towards that within our schools, within our industry, just based off of not seeing macro as something that we need to be involved in any longer.
Right.
But that, I believe, is my opinion.
Heather?
When you ask the word why, it's one of those things where it's a loaded
question. Yeah.
There's no one answer.
Yeah. Heather?
Although I certainly echo those sentiments. So I do. Yeah, it's an opinion question, but I think if we, as you said, if we look at the history, I think we can document that there have been changes in the. We look again historically, we have been part of movements. We have been working alongside to amplify people's voices, and when people need help being heard, helping with that. And I'm not sure. I think if you ask 10 social workers, what do social workers do?
Yeah.
You get different answers, and a lot of them are going to be around.
Yes.
A lot of it's going to be about working individually with folks. And I think my hope is that we continue to see some movement back to working on the whole continuum of social work, all the way up and down from micro to macro. And there's certainly some national movement trying to get more of that into the schools to get us back there. But I think Sharia, you said it spot on. I think we've moved away from that role.
So should this, and I know the answer, but for those out there that may wonder why this should be a concern for social workers, why should the Black Lives Matter movement concern social workers? I mean, why shouldn't we just focus on counseling one-on-one? Why should we be concerned about what's going on out there in society and, unarmed Black men being killed by police officers? I mean, anybody else could do that, so why should social workers be concerned about that?
Well, I think, honestly, it's our duty. Like when it comes down to it, it's our responsibility, because even though we've moved away from an area, it still needs to be an area that reflects, if we're going to be in a micro, that we are on a continuum of micro through macro, where we can actually affect change, because that's really what it comes down to. As a social worker, we're supposed to affect change. So if that's on an individual level or a societal level, we should be actively involved. So to me, it shouldn't even be a doubt in our minds if we should be involved or not. And I think because of our shift historically, we're in a position now where we think, well, we can step back. But in us stepping back, we've actually started to reflect less about what our ethical duties are in this case. Because moving back and just putting your hands up, and not in those traditions, not in the way of the Black lives, but throwing your hands up.
Yeah, like, oh well, yeah.
Basically, it's someone else's job. Well, if it's someone else's job, then we aren't looking at our ethical requirements to address oppression. So
yeah, I agree.
And our if you look at the introduction to our Code of Ethics, it actually says that we have a duty to social justice. It's one of the core values of social work. And so from my perspective, again, Sherry, I think you put it beautifully. We have to engage. I don't think there's a choice. If you're a social worker and you're looking at this thinking it doesn't apply to me, my question to you is why not? Exactly. And even if your primary area is, even if what you do daily is 50-minute sessions, which is, we need good social workers doing that, because I believe our theories and frameworks make the most sense for working with people too, at that individual level. But your clients are being impacted. Their kids are being impacted. And so if we don't move to address those systems that are impacting our clients and impacting them pretty substantially, then I don't think we're doing our whole job. And your idea of throwing our hands up and saying, this isn't my job, I think we are abdicating our ethical responsibilities. I think it's absolutely necessary.
And I think
go ahead.
No, and I think if we look at it in just the plainness of when you signed up for this job, part of this job doesn't indicate that you only get to dictate in this small frame as to how you address it. Because the reality is, then you could have chosen psychology, or you could have chosen a different angle at working directly with clients, which is very specific. This is our job. This is the only role we have. But when you chose social work, you chose a broader approach to society issues. And I think when we only look at, now this is a way for me to get to that individual service, we don't look at the entirety. And going back to even the framework of our different theories, we don't look at the entire person, because the entire person is a part of this society. Exactly. And so the effect that they're having, is almost impossible for us as social workers specifically to say, well, as long as I'm addressing the individual needs, I'm doing my part. You are doing a part, but we are an entire system, not just one. So.
Well, and I actually will sometimes ask, if you're a clinician who's working with clients, I ask people to think about the last 6 months, things that your clients have come in with that they've all had the same issue with this. Then that's your job to go after that systemic issue. Just think how much time you're going to save when the issue itself
is addressed.
Yeah, and so I think we have to get back. And when we do our job, you were talking about the kinds of classes you teach, Rita. When we as social workers learn those skills, we really can help amplify the voice of a community themselves. We don't even have to do it. We can say, here are some skills, and let them then do what they're doing even better. So we can support them.
Exactly.
And support includes education.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Exactly. So I just wanted to read for those who are watching who's really not familiar with what macro level social work is, just to give them an idea of what macro level social work is. So macro level practice may involve work with an organization, a community, a state, or even a society as a whole. Obviously, macro level practice also deals with interpersonal relations, but these are the interactions between people who represent organizations or who are members of a work group, such as an agency committee or interagency task force. When engaged in macro level practice, the social worker is frequently involved in activities such as administration, fundraising, testifying on proposed legislation, policy analysis, class advocacy, and social resource development. So there's a lot of opportunity for macro social workers when it comes to the Black Lives Matters movement, because as we can see in the news from Ferguson and Baltimore, there aren't a lot of jobs. The education system is poor and failing. Seems like they have no hope. You know, they have no trust in the system. They have no trust in their police officers, and they feel as though the system is not for them. So we have a lot of opportunity as social workers um, to impact, and help uh, to help the Black Lives Matters movement. So as far as the NASW Code of Ethics, what specifically? Because I think that's key for social workers, because as a grad student, I hear a lot of code of ethics and this is unethical and there's unethical and no, we can't do this and we can't do that. But today we're going to talk about what we can do and why participating in the Black Lives Matters movement is ethical. So do you guys have anything specific that we can point to where we can show the social workers that it is ethical to get involved and it's our call of duty to get involved with the Black Lives Matters movement?
Really quickly, just before you go to that, because I'll let Heather guide us a little bit with the points and then I'll kind of add to.
Okay.
But I also want to make sure that when we think about systemic issues, that we look at how social workers can address them with being a part of even their individual role.
Okay.
Because I think what happens when we separate the two, macro and micro, we sing this in, that's your job, this is mine over here. But one of the things that I would like us to do more of is to incorporate the entirety of both elements into our work, because that way it won't be just your responsibility to deal with the system and my responsibility to deal with the individual. So we can have a shared venture. So I just wanted to make that point, because when you read off that mouthful about macro, I know if I wasn't a macro student, I would have been like, that is not my job.
Oh, okay.
But I want to make that point, because it really is important for us to see that even in our individual work, we should be doing macro work. And even in our macro work, we should never forget the individual work.
Right. And so that's a good point.
It's a very important point that I think especially if we're going to talk about the ethical element and then go into planning and action, it's all of our jobs.
Okay. And that's a good point. Because, I mean, even Sherelle, you asked me what was my goal, after I graduate. And I just don't feel like I have to choose either or. I mean, I feel like I could be involved in both. So it doesn't have to be an either or. I'm a macro social worker or I'm a micro. It's like we have the ability and the skills to do both. Exactly. So that's a good point. Heather,
it's duty to do both. I think that point has to continue to be made, because we have, even in our schools, we have macro tracks, micro tracks, right? Exactly. Do you want to get licensed? Because if you want to get licensed, you better take that micro track. Even how you figure out to get everybody on that full continuum. Because we all bring biases to the table, right? Yeah. One of my biases is I think that you're a better systems person when you've had that individual interaction and really...
That's mine as well.
listen and hear. Because you don't know everything. At least I don't. Maybe you can. I don't want to know everything. Sometimes I like to pretend I do. I tell my teenagers. No, is your specific question about the Code of Ethics, is it okay with you guys if I point out a couple places in the code I think apply?
Oh no, go ahead.
So just even the introduction, the preamble to it, the sentence is social workers promote social justice and social change with and on behalf of clients. Clients is used inclusively to refer to individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities. And when I'm in my, kind of annoying, giving my students a hard time mode, I say things like, notice it doesn't say social workers when they have time or social workers if they so choose. It says that we do it. And it seems to me to be a call to action that isn't necessarily optional for us as social workers. And so, especially, again, when you think about social justice being one of the 6 core values of our being as social workers.
Right.
You can't get around it.
Yeah.
Well, we shouldn't get around it. I'm sorry.
Right. Well, yeah, and unfortunately, and when we do, again, my bias, when we do, then we're not doing the full spectrum of social work, and we're letting our clients down, be they individual or community groups.
Exactly.
That in the commitment to clients under 1.01, a little eggheady, but hey, if we're going to talk about the code of ethics,
that's okay.
I'll go to the specifics. But it talks about our commitment to our clients,
right.
And it says our primary responsibility is to promote the well-being of clients. But the second sentence says, in general, clients' interests are primary. However, social workers' responsibility to the larger society or specific legal obligations may be, on limited occasions, supersede the loyalty owed to clients. Now, the example they give with that is more along the lines of when child abuse is reported to the social work, our legal obligation may be to report that to law enforcement, even though generally there's confidentiality. But as I read that, I wonder if we should also think about our responsibility to the larger society part of that.
Exactly.
And that doesn't mean that we aren't thinking about our clients' well-being, but often I think that when we do think about our clients' well-being, it forces us to think about that larger society. Mm-hmm. If we're working with families whose sons are impacted by this, and daughters, I know that recently we're seeing more and more names of unarmed Black women.
Yes.
Who are being killed by police,
yes.
particularly when mental illness.
Yes.
There's a panoply of things we could bring in. I know we won't have time for it today, but the women too. I don't know how we can be working with people whose kids are affected and not pay attention to that, talk about it, and try to impact it. And as a white woman, to me, I don't want my kids growing up in a world where their friends and family can be impacted by this. It's just an unjust world. Mm-hmm. So I think it specifically applies to people who are directly impacted. But I think to pretend as a white person that I shouldn't care or it doesn't apply to me
doesn't make sense.
Yeah, well, and I would argue I have to. Mm-hmm. All of this anyway. That's it. So administration 3.07 is all macro stuff. So just take a look, folks, if you're interested. And then I think, Sharia, the one you brought up was 6.04, that social and political action we were talking earlier. And again, here we go. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's painful. I have a slide on it if anybody's interested.
What I did was I actually highlighted the points within it because it is very lengthy and wordy. And I think, again, it gives us that easy way out of not dealing with macro because it's just too much to read. Mm-hmm. But I did highlight the points that I thought were helpful, and if you want, I can go
for it. Please, they're tired. Go.
So what I highlighted was for 6.04, which is social and political action, which is under section 6, which is the last section, social work ethical responsibilities to a broader society. And I make that point because it goes again to say that we're even how we see it as like the last important thing for us to do is to go and deal with the larger society. But the points under there that I thought was really relevant to especially Black Lives Matter is engaged in social and political action, ensure that people have equal access to resources, employment, services, and opportunities they require to meet their basic human needs and develop fully. So if we think about it, because I have some more, but I want to just, instead of going, I'll talk through each. But if we think about it, when we think about our basic needs, we look at the second one, which is safety, and we think about if we are not safe, how can we fully develop and really get to a self-actualized person without having safety being a requirement for all of us? And so when I'm thinking of my individual clients and their sons, their daughters, their families being affected by an issue of safety, then even if I didn't want to address it, I should feel compelled to address it because it affects their well-being individually and then societal. So for me, I felt like if we even just made it basic needs,
right,
feeling unsafe in a society where you are supposedly free does not feel good for any of us. And I do think it's important, what Heather was saying, that we look at this issue as not just Black males, but the entirety of Black lives, because it does matter that if we add mental health, because that's my background is mental health and health. So when I can tell you the names of the stories in New York and the opportunities they've had with other Black lives, but then you add on the mental health, and then it becomes this larger element of basic needs and not approaching them and not dealing with them in our societal, and how we even train police officers, how we make sure there's a discussion about not just our young boys being prepared to interact with the police, but our young girls, and being able to say that after I'm prepared, you still need to be trained, right? So we need both elements. So that's the first one. And before I go on, if you ladies want to chime in, because I can talk all day.
But, I think it's important because a lot of this is importantly talking about how do we respond to this idea that the police officer training, because the police officers, that training and the way they approach, and the willingness to draw the gun, the fear, the societal condition of who are they afraid of?
Exactly.
That the people being impacted can only change so much.
Exactly.
It has to be that side too. So I think that I love the framing you're using for this, because it brings everything. And there's so many different places, no matter what you feel your role is as a social worker, there's some place for you to enter in. So that I love the way you're. Sorry, keep going. I thought it was great. I don't know that.
Well, I just wanted to add one thing that as I was looking for practicum placements, I found out that social workers actually are employed at police stations as well too. So it's like, even if you're a social worker and you're working closely with police officer, there's an opportunity for you to impact and make a positive change there.
Yeah. And having a discussion about other things that they may not be aware of, because I think sometimes we have the tendency to think that, well, you should just get it. But the reality is that all information is privileged. So how someone experiences life is based off of what they're privileged to have. And so I don't have exposure to a different culture, then I won't know the specific entities of that culture. If you're a social worker in a police station, you understand some culture that you and I may never know. But then that also gives you an opportunity for those police officers to understand a social work culture, which means that look at the person as more than just their race. Look at the person as more than just their gender or your fear related to that gender and that race. Look at them as a person that needs your assistance, protect and serve, kind of, right? That needs your assistance versus that needs your control. And I think some of that stuff, when we think about it globally and not just individual, if you're in that office, then you can drop education here and there. No one's telling you to lose your job.
Right.
But we are saying that it's important that you should advocate and make sure that people are aware of other ways to respond.
Exactly.
And you might actually save a life without even knowing it.
Exactly.
Right.
So
exactly.
There's 4 that I'm going to talk about. So the next one is still within 6.04, but it's letter B. And it says, act to expand choices and opportunities for people with special regard to vulnerable, disadvantaged, oppressed, and exploited people and groups. Now, one of my new dear things to my heart has been human trafficking. Now, I go through these stages where God just says, that's your call, go over there. So when I saw this, I was like, well, look, when we think about safety, going back to the first one, and then we think about the things that we don't address, when we just let people be oppressed and exploited, then as social workers, we're saying it's acceptable for society to do it.
Right.
Because if I look at it individually, it's being able to catch someone saying the wrong type of statement about how women should be. correct, being willing to say that, I don't appreciate you using the N word around me, and being okay with that, because I'm trying to model a behavior that says if we use that word, then we also think of those individuals that way, regardless of your race. So let me start there, and that be my part. So if we look at it, and when I brought up the human trafficking for a moment, just for the exploitation portion of it, because when we think about oppressed people, the next stage of that is exploitation. Because really, when it comes down to it, you're not safe in your communities. That means that you actually be exploited in your communities. Because we don't even mention the police who will steal the drugs from the drug dealers. Right. We don't mention the police who will come in and say, I'm not going to hurt you this time, but I'm going to take all the money out your pocket. Right. We're not mentioning those portions of the police not policing a community based off of history, but also being violating that population. So when we think about oppression, it evolves to exploitation. And if we look at the individual, there is no way it's not affecting them when they're trying to get employment, when they're trying to get, even just go to school. When we think about our children, the safety level and even the exploitation of them, well, you know what? Because I'm a young girl, does that mean that I won't be hit by the police officer? Right. So I think when we look at it, we have to look at what happens when we leave one thing unaddressed, starts to develop into multiple things. Right. And so when we look at leaving oppressed or going to our private practices and leaving that system problem to the macro people, then we leave it to a group that will not be able to affect the individual. Right. So it's like we need to look at the whole. So I'm going to stop again. So, and I just brought those up because oppression to me will lead, because no matter what, and I'm going to talk about privilege, and if we get to that subject, privilege is not just about race. Privilege is about gender. It's about economic. It's about a multitude of things. And some of the things we can't do is assume that if we leave one thing unaddressed, it won't evolve into something else. Right. Exactly.
Heather, you have anything to add?
Other than it's so much, right?
Yeah.
And as I listen to us, as we're just kind of chewing on this, I think people, as you said, when you hear Yolanda reading about macro, ooh, that's so much, I'm done. And I think the reality is that no matter where your primary practice is in social work, there is something you can cling to.
Yes.
And get passionate about and do something about.
Exactly.
And if we all did that, there is power in numbers.
Exactly.
The social workers out there. No one social worker has to be in charge of all of it.
Exactly.
And nor should they, probably, because they stink. We did it. Yeah. There's only so many hours in the day. But I think that when we get overwhelmed and just say it's too much, you can't fix it.
Fixed.
That's right. Well, and the other thing is, I listened to all those issues you just brought up. We are experts in some of that. I mean, if you what social work does, we are experts in that, and we often don't own our expertise.
Exactly.
We often cede our expertise to other professionals.
Yes.
You think about these. I use the social determinants of health or health disparities language because I do a lot in public health. And a lot of the things that you just said fall into those health disparity roles. And if you think about who knows how to pull in multiple systems and how to get them working together, even if you think about exactly. Yeah. When if you think about the social workers working with one social worker or one person, and the kinds of services they can pull together for that one person. If we think about the skills we use to do that and apply it at a broader level, it's not something new and scary. It's the same kinds of skills applied at a different level. And so I think if we continue to have those conversations between people who see themselves at the different ends of the continuum, maybe we can start getting everybody a little more comfortable moving across that continuum
instead of just one element.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna get through them. I promise.
Oh, that's okay.
C is to promote conditions that encourage respect and cultural and and social diversity within the United States and globally. So when you just look at the cultural element, regardless of what culture you lie in, you're responsible for all of us, and all of us are responsible for each other. So I think it was important. Heather, you said, well, I wouldn't want my children to grow up in a world where this is acceptable. because that means that their families, their friends, the people they may love are basically affected by it. Mm-hmm. If we stop looking at it as something that is their issue, which means Black lives or Black people's issue, mm-hmm. and it being a societal issue because it does affect us all, then we can actually address it and say, I'm going to be a part of this. One of the, I went to the march here in Philadelphia in solidarity for Baltimore last, and one of the best things that I saw was that there was an array of cultures, different professions. So I had lawyers out there with signs that said we are against, and it was specifically Black lives. We have people chanting Black Lives Matter, regardless of what your background was.
Right.
And it pains me to know that social workers don't see that same entitled, requirement, I should say, for us to do the same and to be there. Because the reality was that there was a group of women that were all lawyers. There was only one person that was Black in that whole group. Mm. And all of them had Black lives, either shirts on, a poster, and because the issue is larger than just the individual. Mm-hmm. It's the societal, it's the legal, it's all of our issue to start to address, because that's how it gets better. Mm-hmm. Because if we leave it up to one to fix it, it won't get better, because one person can't be responsible for something that includes us all.
Right. Exactly.
So, and I think, go ahead. No.
When you're talking about that cultural diversity, social diversity, both here and globally, really, I think that it will be important. I'm going to sneeze, excuse me.
Oh, bless you.
I think it would be important that we continue as schools to do additional education on the history of how we got to where we are.
Yes.
Because it's really, the more I'm still learning, but the more I learn about how this country was built and how, and even before the U.S., but specifically how society was created in the U.S. and some of the things that were built right into how land was given, how things happened, and how generationally it still matters. Mm-hmm. I think if we understood more about that, it would help us to be better able to advocate and to better able to understand and be better able to educate others in our social circles. Which even that can be something you can do to have an influence.
Right.
Yes. And which basically sounds to me like not be silent.
Yeah.
Not just accept it's okay to have an opinion that differs from what the norm tells you is okay to say. Well, so if someone says something that is based off of ignorance and not of being aware of history, giving them the real history might be a part of how you help. Exactly. Because what you're saying is that it's not okay just because we may share a color or a gender to say something that's not appropriate for someone that doesn't share what we have. Because we can't assume that everyone has had the same opportunities. And the way I know that is because I'm an expert, right? Because as a social worker, you've gotten the expertise. And that's where I think professionally we need to stop downplaying who we are and what we are. Because really, if you ask me, like, people in my life know, don't say certain things around her because she is going. And that could be and it doesn't require me to be a part of that group for me to go on it. Because the reality is that if you are talking about any oppressed, exploited group, then it's going to be someone, or disadvantaged group, then it's going to be someone that I say, look, you're going to have to hear the truth and then sit with it. It's not my responsibility for you to be uncomfortable with the truth.
Right.
But I'm not going to let the truth not be said just because it's easier for us to deal with it.
Right.
And so I think, I'm sorry.
No, please, I didn't mean to interrupt. Keep going.
I was going to say, because I do think that with Heather, your point, it speaks to us being educated differently, even within our schools. Mm-hmm. Because I think as when we talk about Black Lives Matters, and I don't know for your school or for others, we put an emphasis on the individual element of diversity and culture. We don't look at the system. We don't look at the larger systems. We just kind of talk about them, but we don't go into classes that are talking about the history of this country and how it was built and how it affects the different cultures. We tell you how to work with the different cultures in therapy.
Right.
Okay, that's great. But why do we have to put this element of specialty into even in place so that I can understand the core issue, so that I can help the families that I work with, the individuals that I work with, understand part of it as well? Because you'd be surprised how regardless of the population, they don't understand how we are here.
Right.
When in reality, this is going back to that work. This is an evolution.
Right. Exactly.
Where we go next is even scarier if we do nothing about it.
Exactly. Because it's not I know some some people, they are wishing and hoping that the Black Lives Matter movement just go away and dies down, but I can guarantee you that it's not, and we're still in the beginning stages. And yeah, and it's not going anywhere because these people are literally fighting for their lives. I mean, so it's not just something, somebody made up, or, or just a fad, just a fad that we're just going through at the moment. It's like, no, people are literally fighting for their lives. I mean, if you can't walk down the street and feel safe, or if you don't feel safe when you come in contact, with a police officer, you don't know if you're going to go home after that encounter, there's a problem. So yeah, people are literally fighting for their lives. When people are out there protesting, they are fighting for their children, their sister, their brother, their husbands. And to be honest, I never thought about this. I mean, as far as my husband, walking out, out the door, going to the store, until this Black Lives Matter movement started, and I started seeing, everything on the news, because, we live in an okay area. And so I could walk down the street, without any issues or anything. But actually, this movement has really opened my eyes to where I think he went to the store or something. And actually, it hit me. It's like, man, he might not come home, I mean, that there's just a possibility, that because the color of his skin or some miscommunication, I don't know, if he looks somebody, a police officer in the eye, he may not come home. Mm-hmm. And that really hit home for me because I never thought about that before.
And I think that goes into going back into history and knowledge. When I talk about privilege in my class, I don't talk about just race privilege, because what that was considered was economic privilege. There's some level of, when we are separate from the events that are happening, we don't have the effect of them, so we don't feel it. Yeah. But the reality is it's still happening.
Yeah.
And which means it could still happen. And this movement is about awareness.
Yeah.
That's what I believe first.
Yeah.
But it also is about action. Because we can't get so aware that we do no action.
Exactly.
Because I think that part is what America, not just any part of America, we do that really well.
Yeah.
We can tell you all about the problem, but we have no solution.
Yeah.
And I think as we think about this issue, we have to look at where are we coming from with it. Because I live in an okay neighborhood as well. Mm-hmm. But the reality is I live in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. It's a major city. It's constant that there is violence, and it's constant that the violence that we see may be reflective according to my race or my or gender, mm-hmm. right? But I also am very aware that if I go into certain places, I'm safer, but I'm never safe, because I do still mark a difference to the police officers.
Exactly.
Right? So the issue has always been there. This is just the awareness stage. And I think as we do the awareness, we can't let it die there.
Right.
Right? Because that part only allows us to do so much, which is basically almost, if we think about grief, it only allows us to know that we have a loss.
Right.
Doesn't mean that we can't go into being able to accept it and then have how we deal with it. We have to be able to look at this as an opportunity, social workers specifically, for us to be able to build up our individuals that we work with mm-hmm. based off of a societal issue, and also help support our individuals by being at these rallies, being at some of the protests, showing up and signing up.
Yeah.
Right? And we look at all these petitions going around, and I don't know if everybody else gets 1 million in their emails.
Yeah.
It's just me. But sometimes you're signing and you don't even read the details of it. So understanding the details of what's going on so that you can have a larger effect. We can't tell everyone to do the exact same things.
Right.
I think we get to planning, if we have the time today, I think it will be important for us to at least give some, here's what you may be able to do. Okay. So I'm going to move us on with the last one, because it kind of goes into the other one when it comes to ethics.
Okay.
And it basically states prevent and eliminate domination or exploitation of and or discrimination against any person, group, or class on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression age, or expression, age, marital status, political beliefs, religion, immigration status, or mental or physical disability. Now, that one was a mouthful, but I was not going to leave out any of the people that were supposed to.
Right.
Because the reality says that if you think this doesn't matter, it matters on at least 4 or 5 of those different ones that I mentioned, just because it does affect our political beliefs. It does affect what we think should happen to individuals who are a part of police brutality. And it affects us on a larger global scale as to what policy can we have that effectively changes this and makes it not acceptable, and then what kind of consequences for when it does happen. Because now we can't just say that something is out there and do nothing about it.
Right.
And the discomfort level. So one of the things that I think, and I think this, you're right, this is a nice segue into moving towards what can we do. But I think some of the reasons that it's hard or we don't see it taught as much as we could is because people are worried about saying the wrong thing, worried about getting uncomfortable. You said you teach us in your class. We talk about all different kinds of, I put it under the isms category. We talk about all different kinds of things like that in my classes. And never once am I like, oh, I feel so wonderfully comfortable. This is going to be great. It's
never comfortable.
No, and I always tell my student, I am human. I may put my foot in my mouth, and please let me know when I do, because I need to own that when I do it too. But I think that the discomfort piece really oftentimes keeps us from having these conversations. And one of the things that I think as social workers we need to think about is we will go in a room and we will say, so do you do drugs? When's the last time you had sex? Are you sharing needles? Think about the things we ask people on the daily basis and don't even blink an eye
at all.
We know how to deal with that uncomfortable stuff. So let's do it with each other, and let's do it with the system, and let's have these conversations. Nobody's better prepared to do it than social workers, in my opinion. Let's do this. And let's lose our fear. And I am saying that as a call to action, not just to other people, to myself as well, because I struggle. I don't want to say the wrong thing, but it is, if we don't have these conversations, we can't get to the action steps.
Exactly.
And you got to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. But that's a part of that's a part of growth, though. Being uncomfortable, like you said, maybe if we do say the wrong thing. And I think that's a part of the issue too, is like, just my opinion from being a student, it's like social workers try to be so politically correct. And it's like, we're not going to be politically correct all the time. I mean, I know what they teach us in school, but we're just not, because we're human. And if you open yourself up and allow yourself to make mistakes, allow yourself, okay, if you do say the wrong thing and, someone brings it to your attention, well, that's an opportunity for growth.
Yeah, that's called learning.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, there's nothing wrong with being human, and there's nothing wrong with sticking your foot in your mouth, every now and then. But the point is, as long as you grow from it, I think it's worth you putting your foot in your mouth. So it's just like, we have to be open to that.
One of the points that Heather made that I think really is helpful for any of us when it comes to something we're uncomfortable with is to be uncomfortable.
Right.
Be uncomfortable so that you can learn. Be uncomfortable so that you can get an opportunity to get new information. And then be uncomfortable enough to say that I'm willing to learn more so I can know more, to do more, that people don't think like I did.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we keep saying that what I believe is right, then all of us are going to be in a bad situation.
Yeah.
Because the only way that I could learn that, I didn't know what was going on when it comes to, say, exploitation. And I didn't know the levels of different types of things going on right in my backyard.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that I now just can't be involved because I didn't know.
Right.
It means that I got new information. So now there's something for me to do with that new information and find out where I can help and be willing to take a risk with being uncomfortable, because you will not say the right things or know the right things to say because you're still learning.
Exactly. And we're human.
Yes.
We are human.
Super social worker cape.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, we're human. First of all, we're human. And it's okay. Look, it's okay. Okay, so action steps. We can just go right to that. We have about 15 minutes left. So we can go into the action steps and planning as to how we can make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Did Yolanda, I think you had stuff that you had already said people had already started. Did you want to start there and then we can talk?
Okay. So I got this information off of a website entitled blacklifematters.org, and it's out of Chicago. So they started, I guess, their own little Black Lives website for the Chicago area. So some goals that they had listed was number one was get the word out. Number two, build the network. 3, fundraise. Community reform. Legislative initiatives. Block by block projects. Church sponsored after school programs. Get the word out. Build the network. Fundraise. Another thing in Chicago they have listed is building a first charter school, K through 12, trade school openings, nationwide Black Lives Matters Community Center, get the word out, build the network, and fundraise. So these are just a few examples of the goals that folks in Chicago have, in mind as far as the Black Lives Matters movement.
Well, I thought I was trying not to be a teacher. It was so hard because you want people to create a plan,
yeah,
and just tell them the plan and get out there and do it.
Right.
But I feel like if you don't understand what you're doing,
right, or why,
and that's why you get so disconnected from why you have to do it.
Yeah.
And I think when we looked at the ethical reason, we have backing now. So now all of us who are watching,
exactly,
anyone that's a social worker should have a reason to say that I could be a part of this, and Black Lives Matters larger than just on an individual basis, but also macro. Right. So I think for me, I wanted to make sure that people understood that any action plan has to have direction.
Yes.
Right. It has to have direction, but it has to be clear enough for people to follow it by having measurable direction. Right. So it can't just be build a school. Okay. So who's going to find that money?
Right. Yeah.
So I think when we have direction, we also need to make measurable. And when I say measurable change, I really mean having time frames, having objectives that identify identifying who will be responsible for what, and what pace are we doing this? Because effective change doesn't happen overnight.
No.
Right. So you have to be also willing, when I say measurements, for it to be a time process, right? Which means that it's a start today, but it doesn't end maybe ever.
Right.
Right. But you need to make sure that your direction has clear timelines that say, well, I'm working from now until next year. And then even those things that I'm doing are broken down to different time frames.
Right.
And so that's where, to me, objectives need to be clear within the direction. Right. So those are the steps, not just so I'm going to do something, but then I need steps to do it.
Right.
So get people clear ideas of how they can help. So if you're saying, one of the examples you said that I thought was like, oh, that's really cool. Block by block projects.
Yes.
That's so vague.
Yeah.
Right? But if I said block by block projects towards educating police, right? So what we do is we have a community, the direction is to be a block by block project, but one of the objectives is to invite the police officers in to have a conversation with community leaders.
Right.
And then to invite them to have an education process with some younger men. So then there's steps within that block by block project.
Right.
So that way it's clear, not just this
vague
thing out there, which gives me no reals. I have no focus. I can't do anything with that. And then I have a target based off of my objective. So my objective is to basically improve communication with police officers and the community. Then I'm actually going to show that block by block project is going to be able to do that through having the fundraisers that relate to the police officers being a part of them, having a fair where police officers, they get to come in uniform and get to show how they work, what they were trained, and have discussions with younger men who are afraid of them, right? So, but I'm going to have steps to get to there. Right. I'm not just going to say, well, tomorrow we're going to start this block by block project and everyone go and do it. So I think if we are going to plan, especially as social workers, I think one of the points that Heather made was that we have the skills. This is something that really sounds like, if you think about it, your intervention. Right. It sounds like your objectives when you're talking about the goals you're trying to reach with your clients, right? So really, you're just doing that on a now community-based level. So you're making it more, if I can't get to advocate on the policy level and be in DC because I'm across the country, then here's what I can do on my block. Right. And making it clear that it's towards helping people know that it's about Black Lives Mattering, right? So if I'm saying a block by block project, I'm making it clear that it's connected to Black Lives Matter. So that way, when they're doing this, you see the awareness part that they said they want in there consistently. But it also gives me an opportunity to say there's steps to this and you're included. So I invited the police officers for a reason, not just because it's a party for them. No, but because I want them to be connected to the community, to this block, to the block after that. I want them to know, Tommy name and know that, wait, he wants to be a basketball player. Even though he's 5 now, I'm going to have to interact with him when he's 15. So now that I remember that, maybe I'll have a connection with him that will make me say that his life matters individually because he's Tommy, but he's also Black. Right. So it makes us have to connect on a different way by having projects that are clear. I think one of the worst things, and this is just person like my internship / my business is about designing programs. One of the worst things to do is to have this vague mission that doesn't give me clear steps. So you have your vague mission, but those steps and objectives really have to be what we focus on. Because if we want to see change, we have to be able to give people a buy-in. Which means that I'm part of it. You know what? I can be a part of a block party. Right? But I can also be a part of, and I can't remember one of the other ones that you mentioned.
Community reform, legislative initiatives.
Okay, so I also could be a part of that by writing to my congressman about how I feel. Writing to them to say that we're inviting police officers, yet we haven't seen one politician come. Right? So making it clear that I'm going to hold you accountable. Exactly. I'm going to hold these police officers accountable. So being able to incorporate those different phases or goals that they were trying to reach by setting up a plan. And making it clear enough for people to buy into. Because as social workers, I think we do that. That is our, like, we can sell water to anybody. So if we can do that, then we can also get people to buy in at different levels. Exactly. Right? So if you hear something going on, and it's not just, because I think what we have been doing a lot of lately is this GoFundMe. Give me some money. It's like, where's the plan behind this money that I'm giving? And I think when it comes to this issue, because the Black Lives Matter, it has to be more than just collecting money to do. It has to collect money and show them what you're doing. Exactly. And even on that, and I took the block by block project for the purpose of it makes it reasonable for a person at home to be able to be a part of it. Versus I work a lot of hours a day. I may not be able to make a protest, but I sure can make sure on Saturday after I get off work, I go there and show my face to support the police officers, but also to support the community so that they can know that these lives matter to me too. Right. So, but I wanted to make sure that people, please don't just be out there saying you're doing something without clear steps and helping people to see how it affects the change that you want to see. Yeah, I think that's good.
Well, and I think people, the people designing programs have got to get on it. I think that is so, because it is such a big movement. People are so emotional, reasonably, and should be, and that's part of the power of this. And we need to make sure that there's that planning. We've got the Sharias of the world out there helping us ensure that the plans make sense and are going to be where we want to go. And the other piece for people who listen to that and think that is great, there is no way I can do that right now. What I would say to the social workers is, I think we're pretty good at smelling out a good program too. So if you are the leader of the program and you want to do something, then making sure as you choose where to put your energy, your money, your efforts, you're using those kinds of criteria for making the decision where to engage. Exactly. If you want to write a letter, finding those groups who have measurable objectives and targets and all of those things and saying, how can I support you with a letter?
Exactly.
Can I write a letter to the editor talking about the strengths of your program because you have got the right kind of tools that are going to move this forward? And doing that, it doesn't take. I think people get scared to write an op-ed or an editorial. And I think people probably know the difference, but in case somebody doesn't, an op-ed is something more where it's a little bit longer and the paper publishes it as kind of you're the expert. And a letter to the editor is even a little bit shorter, and you write that and they would publish that letter with your name on it too. But they're a little bit different. But you could write about specific programs in your area that you know have those kinds of things. You can, if you're going to talk to people at your church, temple, mosque, a neighborhood, wherever, about the programs that meet those goals, or even about some of the issues, because we're social workers and we know how to have those difficult conversations, even if we're scared to. And one of the things, and some of these I'm getting from ACOSA, the organization that did a call to action. One of the things is do not be silent. I think is exactly what Sharia was saying earlier.
Yes.
Speak up. Even individually, if you're in a community where you feel like it would be beneficial for law enforcement to have conversations around these things, which I would argue is probably every community, make an appointment. Go in and talk with folks there. Just see if you talk with them specifically about the issues. Have a conversation. Bring it out in the open. Discuss concerns. All of those kinds of things. That's not enough. What is it said earlier? It's not. It's necessary but not sufficient. Is that what you said earlier?
It's to that I can't remember, but
something along those lines. And there's been a lot of talk about get out the vote. No, it is probably not enough, but it is something. And I would certainly say the other piece is if you understand the way the government works, if you understand that civics stuff, I'm a little bit of a geek. I love that stuff. And what I'm aware of is many of my extremely educated colleagues, and I'm not talking about the fact that, but my students, college-age students, college-educated people in my neighborhood, they don't know civics. And we can't change the government and we can't change the policies if we don't know that. So if that's something you're strong in, goof around with your friends and chat about it. Talk about those things to make sure people understand where to enter in. And organize. And I think that's where, if you're going to organize, making sure you use that criteria Sharia just mentioned, because if we don't, then we're organizing for naught.
Exactly.
But those are all kinds of things that I think even if we are working 12-hour days, we can do those kinds of things to have an impact, particularly when we do them for good programming that we know is organized along those principles that make sense and will get us somewhere.
Yeah, there's no reason to reinvent a wheel if the wheel is already out there.
Exactly.
Be a part of it and make it more effective, right? Because that way you can't say that there's nothing being done when there are people out there trying to do them. I was trying to look at the NASW for resources, but I didn't see any. So what I'll try to do is make sure that for Yolanda's write up under the YouTube video that we give you some options for what you can do in your community, or I'll just give you the framework that I use for community planning, so you can always start your own course in support of something. Because I do think it's helpful for us to just support what's already working.
Yeah.
And be a part of it versus trying to keep planning and building and doing something new when collaboration equals strength.
Exactly.
Well, and if you've got a local NASW chapter or another kind of professional organization, talking with them about how do we get the word out to all the social workers in our state or in our area, and having those very specific actionable items can be really important. And the other thing you can do is within your organization. Have you had conversations with the powers that be there to make sure that your organization isn't exacerbating the problem by ignoring it?
Exactly.
And again, that's something you can do within the framework safely, hopefully, within the framework of your organization and making wise decisions about how to do that. And police officer training.
Yeah.
You know, increasingly we're seeing social work used in police departments.
Mm-hmm.
They've had some, I wish that I looked it up prior to this and could cite it. It's my understanding there's some programs out there that specifically partner social worker with police officers and that are having some impact. I do not have a citation, so I could be wrong. I'll look that up when we're done. But could you volunteer?
Right.
To do something like that? Could you volunteer to do some training with the local police department in a positive way that can hopefully, again, bring that education piece, assert that social work expertise because we have it.
Exactly. All right. Well, ladies, this was a great discussion, very informative. And I appreciate you guys taking out your time out of your day to speak with me regarding this important issue. So if anyone wants to contact you regarding things we talked about today, Heather, would you like to give them like an email or your Twitter address or anything like that? I mean, you not put the Twitter address on there.
So my email, and I also want to say, I probably should have said at the beginning, this was me speaking personally.
Yeah.
Through my social work expertise, not speaking on behalf of Indiana University in any way. But probably should have said that at the beginning, but I want to be clear. And my email is HA as in Heather Ann McCabe, MCCAB as in boy E at iupui.edu. And my Twitter is at Professor McCabe. I do. I have found a lot of information on the movements through Twitter.
Yes.
And if you aren't involved with that, it doesn't take a lot of time, but boy, I have found it useful to my learning.
Yes.
It is extreme. I totally agree with that. I just was telling one of my classes that the one thing I love about this generation is that they will not be quiet on social media.
Yes.
And to me, that's an effective way to get your points, your views, and everything across. And yes, you're going to have the trolls that will roll down with you and say all the negative things in the world, but they're talking about it.
Yes.
And so the reality is that I know we're done, but I think that's just one more element of what you can do is make sure that you're reflecting what you want people to be aware of in your social media.
Yes.
Because people are looking, even if it's just for a moment.
Exactly.
So I had to open up mine to be able to give you my sadly, but it's the truth. My Twitter, I'm just still, okay. Not going to tell my age. So, my Twitter is at Sunshine Day 4. So that's at Sunshine Day 4. When it pulls up, you'll see Radiant Sunshine, which is my company. And so my email where you can reach me is...
Sheree, is that 4 as in F-O-U-R or the number 4?
The number 4. Thank you. See? The number 4. And my email is Sharea, SHAREA, at radiantsunshine.org. So you can check me out on Twitter or you can email me. Either way, I'm really open to discussing the subject of Black Lives Matters. Organization and planning is very important to me, especially when it comes to social service and human service. So I'm always willing to come and talk as well on the subject because it's important. So.
Excellent. And if you would like to get in touch with me, you can reach me on Twitter at SWIN Action, ACTION. And my email is SWINAction00@gmail.com. And we would like to thank you all for tuning in. This was a great, very informative discussion. And today we're talking about Black Lives Matter. And I think it'll be appropriate to say social work matters too. And we can help, we can contribute, and we're just waiting on you. If you want change, it's up to you to make it happen. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.